two-way thing, but in relationship. It's not you doing it on your own, but in relationship. Thank you.
Will you all be in town long, or do you have any more shows?
We have autographs that are available for retreat.
That's right. So holding that visual in our minds, going back to the three circles that Mark had presented, at least I think it was you who presented it, I was kind of mulling over these things, because I've been on my own all week, so this is what I do. So we've got mission, ministry and worship. And in mission, I thought, sometimes as a church we think we attract. We've got to get people coming in. Whereas if you were to think about it, we need to also think about sending out. Going out, not just coming to church, but going out. We need both. But just to think about your own community, what it is that you're actually encouraging more of. Ministry. We can have the dualistic, as they say, or the messianic. I'll explain it. Dualistic is where we say that it comes from the Greek heritage that we have in our culture, Western culture. So we see everything as black and white, old and young, women and men, old, all these things where it's just like that, life and death. And I think, I'm sure, well, I hope that you've heard me say that I think in Nyasa, things get a bit more put together. So life and death becomes a circle. It touches each other, so we haven't had that. By messianic, I mean looking at Jesus in the centre. And Mark will tell you at the end what some of the things he's been hearing about, with
Bishops.
Presiding bishops. Sorry, I want to say archbishop. You don't use that word. Curry. He's really into Jesus movement and everything is Jesus. And Mark says every time he speaks, it's about Jesus. So it's a whole new way of looking and to see that focus. Worship. This is one of my favourite ones. The hierarchical, we wait for the bishop to decide everything, do everything, say what we can do.
Yes.
Or is it shared?
Now it is official.
Is it a shared thing, which I would see as apostolic, because then people get involved in planting the church, not just the bishop and whoever he decides to do that. Oh, I'm being revolutionary a little bit. And then I put it between that, things that I feel like I've learned from Mozambique. Worship and mission requires action. We can't just say we want to do it, there's action involved. Context totally reflects on how we do mission and how we do ministry. Of course it does. It depends on each place that we're doing it to. And please, putting celebration back into worship, which is what I learned in Mozambique. It's not just something that we do as rote, but celebrate. It changes your whole attitude to being in church. But I want to show you some pictures now to try and sort of bridge that going to the poor. I have a personal thing with it, the poor, because I say to people, I actually have faces in my mind when I talk about poor. The poor becomes too generic and it doesn't touch us in any way. But I'm going to show you some people, some friends and other people that we've been working with, and tell you some of their story to try and help you see something about what I'm trying to say. Last week we celebrated International Women's Day, and in Mozambique they celebrate that. They celebrate. The women all get new clothes. Here, I chose this picture to show you that clay that is put around the face. It's there because it's a celebratory day, but women will put clay on their faces when they're going to be working outside a lot because it protects the skin. So it's one of those things. But celebration. And in celebrating, we're actually doing something different and it came home to me this year because we're here, and like on Facebook I'm getting pictures from friends back in Mozambique I know they're celebrating, they got their new clothes on and they're with a bunch of women, and here it was, which is fine, it's about the equality and all these issues that we're still faced with. And somewhere we're in the middle of it all as church, I believe. I think we need to do more, of course we do, but also recognise that there is a celebration of life that we can bring into our church. There has been an organisation in Britain which I've been involved with during this Lent, mainly because they've used a lot of my own pictures in it, so I've had a word in there. And they've decided every day during Lent to pick a picture of Mozambique or Angola, because that's where they're focused, and give it a word that speaks to the world church. And so you'll see a lot of these with that bit on there, which they've used during this Lent to focus people on what it is that can be learnt from such a place as where we were. So this gratitude. And these... Oh, they called it, the hashtag was good to be Anglican. I remember this started just around the time when it was decided, what did they decide, the primates, about the relationship with this church and the rest of the world. I'm not quite sure what they did in the end, but it was decided. So they decided as an organisation they'd focus on what is good. I want to show you and tell you a little bit about these friends here. They are all community priests except for this person. This is Philippa, and she is a canon of St. Paul's Cathedral, and she's a good friend of mine. I stayed a lot with her. In London, yes, sorry. And we're linked with London. We were linked with London, the Diocese of Nyassa and Lebon, which is in the south of Mozambique and Angola. And she came out just after these two were ordained, the first two Mozambican women who were ordained as priests. And she was one of the first women, along with that bunch of first women in London to be ordained. So it's a historic moment that these all met up. And these are three other community priests that I was a part of their training. So this is Osvaldo, Jaime, Francisco, Albertina, and Claudina alongside Philippa. I know these people inside out because I've actually interviewed them as well about their lives, and I do have permission to share their stories, but that would take forever, so I'll just pick out points. Osvaldo is a really serious man. You might not look it so much. Really serious and very dedicated to his community. He's a farmer, and he learned, he told me this once, he learned that when you bring your harvest in, you must pray for it, and you must also give 10% of it to the church. And if you don't, then you haven't got your life in order. You just haven't got your life in order. And this is a man that went through the war as well. This man was part of the fighting that was happening, and I said to him, did you see anybody killed, or did you kill anyone? He said, Mama Elena, in war anything goes. And in Mozambique it was brothers against brothers. And he said, and that stayed with him. This man used to have a really bad temper. That's his own admission, a really bad temper. And if I know anything about the problems of living after war and trauma, then maybe it's connected to that. But his witness, actually now, he says no, he knows how to deal with that, and he feels like he's got a much better family life than he had before because he's learned to deal with his anger. We have Jaime, who's in our cathedral there. He's, I think, turning 60. The others, I think he's only like 45 and he's 49. But Jaime's at the cathedral. Now, he's on his second marriage now, but he was married to a woman who actually became mentally ill. And in the community there, if that happens to your wife, then the community get involved and the family get involved, and they say, you actually don't have to be married anymore to this person. She can go back to her family to look after, which to me is just really sad, but it's what happens. And his first wife is always in the cathedral now, dancing during the whole service, and he is there, and everybody in the community still supports her, still is there for her, but he's no longer married to her. The life of women is extremely vulnerable. He's a good man. The person I really want to tell you about is Francisco, because I learned a lot from him just recently about the importance of land. He was orphaned at the age of 16, and when his father died, who was the first of his parents to die, it meant that they then went to Malawi across the neighbouring country so that they could start again. There was some other family there and they could start again. And so he went there. But they could never get land because his mother was the one who was leading the family and no one would let her have any land in a foreign land. So she came back to Mozambique, and he tells me that she was actually killed because she went back to the family land and she got killed by some medicine or something that was put at the entrance of the field as she stepped over it. So I said, well, how can anybody kill you for land? And he's just looked at me as if, well, this is our life. Land is our life. And if you've got land, you are, again, vulnerable as a woman in that. So he was made an orphan at the age of 16. And by the age of 17, he's married because his family decides that this is the only way that he can actually support himself. And I was thinking about what he told me about what he makes from his mashamba now. He's very proud that he can support himself as a community priest with his field. And I have said to him, so how much do you make from that? He makes 5,000 meticais, which I think is about a month, which is about $150 a month. And he's proud that he can make that. So life is very simple. Claudina is a spark. She is, I think, around my age, middle 50s, and she's had a terrible life. Her husband beat her up, so she left him. She's got 3 or 4 children, all girls, which is difficult, because you need someone to, but she's actually started her own little businesses, and she's doing fine by that. And she paid for her own ordination party. She was so chuffed to be this. I've left Albertina. Albertina, like me, has also an ordained husband, and they are now working together in one of the parishes up near the coast, and doing quite well with it. But her husband has struggled with alcoholism. She is also not very well herself. She lost a baby 3 years ago, who was 6 months old. It's just life. And then Senor Buenacaya and Luis Kawawa. This is going back to the building project that we had with my church. I want to introduce you to Senor Buenacaya. He's actually the director of education in the town we left. So he's fine, he's doing fine. And he decided to be an example to the church community and come along and help us shift some of these stones inside when we were doing the floor of the church. But you notice he comes straight from work and he's still on his cell phone. But it was wonderful that someone of that stature could actually feel that he should also be getting his hands dirty. And Luis Kawawa is 23 years old. He supports 6 of his siblings. 6 siblings. He supports them with this little, it's not a shop, it's not a brick construction, it's made of
Stall.
It's a stall in the street, and he makes something like $3,500, which is about $100 a month, and he's supporting 6 other people that are his siblings. But he is fantastic. He is the person who prepared all the confirmees, all of them. He would have like 150 young people in front of him. And one of the things, this picture was taken just before a confirmation, and he had got all these young people coming in to clean up, to do hard labor actually in the church as part of their dedication, sacrifice to the work of the church. This is just recently also at the election for a new bishop back in January. 21 ballots and a bishop was not chosen. And so then it's gone to this House of Bishops and they still have not chosen, and now they're waiting till September. This is really difficult. It's really difficult. And Signor Patricio here, he's now not, he's dead, he died I think 5 years ago now, but he translated. You can see how people were writing by hand, translating into his local language, and then he would send that book through to our office, to me, and then I'd have to bash it out on the computer. All these languages I don't know, bash it in the computer, and get that printed out. So his was in Mukua. And I just put this in here. There's a bell up there. That's the bell for this church. Our connection with London was very strong. This is St Paul's Cathedral in London, and they hung these banners that a school in London did, a school that was principally Sikh children, not Christian, but Sikh. And they did an art project which was about human values, and they did these 8 banners for us. There's, I can't read them from here, but there's teaching and prophecy and helping and prayer and miracles and healing. And those were sent out and they're hanging in the church where I was then working. But I thoroughly enjoyed that connection, speaking about the use of art in helping people to just see differently. And there was a woman priest who came out 10 years ago or something to do the retreat with our priests, and she was very creative. She brought out this wonderful hanging that we had behind the altar in our cathedral, and if you look at it closely you'll see symbols of London in there. So it was always wonderful for me sitting. I was the only one probably there, well I'm Mark, who knew what some of these symbols were, but have it right at the altar. It was just wonderful. Can you see the pillar box? And then the tube sign, and the red bus down here. And all over there is hands from the children of that church. Yeah. Church planting. When we say church planting, it's being done mainly by the laity, not by the clergy. The clergy then gather it into their own parish, but it's churches like that that are being planted. And here, this is Monica Masosa. She's something like 85 years old now, I think. And she, to me, is the example of sometimes in a community, you hit the wrong people. You think, perhaps, that you have to work through a certain leadership or whatever. If you don't do anything in our cathedral village with Monica Masosa involved, you may as well forget it. She's not got any title at all now in the church, but she's been the diocesan secretary, she's been the head of the Mothers' Union, she's done a lot of things in her life, I think 40 years of life in that one place. And Gloria, who is now the Mothers' Union president, I have to say, this was actually a sad picture because it was our last Sunday at the cathedral. I had just been made an honorary employment and had come back. And that is how many women are becoming HIV positive. But the fact that I didn't know, when I know her so well, hurts because it's still stigmatized. She still could not tell me that that was what she was dying from. You know, you guess in the end, but you just don't know. But Rosa, you have to know Rosa, and I'm telling you, if anybody wanted to visit the Diocese of Nyasa, you would meet Rosa and you would be in very good hands. She would know exactly where to take you. She would know what you, she is the Mothers' Union worker, and we've worked extremely closely together over all these years. Yeah. I just want to show you this. This was where we lived. This is the diocesan centre. That was our house there. Can you see? And this was my church. And then the diocesan office was here. This was the warehouse and a couple of houses of the workers in there. But you could actually rent out little houses here as well. It was a hospitality place. And this is the dry season, which is why I want to show you. But I also want to show you, this was taken in October when I flew back in for some reason. And we built a wall all the way around here. All the way around here. Because you cannot have projects with children unless it's in an enclosed area. It's a massive area, but that was what we needed to do that. And these are two people again from the church. Signor Farhan knows the history of the Church of Nyasa like the back of his hand. Wonderful gentleman. And he brought a friend of his, a neighbour, who was a Muslim. and his entire family came to be baptized in our church because of community that they found there. And then this is Jake. Yes, this is the name of my son. We named this little baby, or I named this little baby, for this lovely lady, Berta, who you couldn't find a nicer person. She's a nurse there. Oh, and there's the banners that I told you have been hanging up in. Can you see? Yeah. These are catechists. Catechists are the lay leaders that usually got one or two in each church. And this is Nyama, my head catechist for them. Now Nyama is dearly loved, dearly loved. He's looked up to everything. When I spoke to him about his life, he told me he'd had 22 children. Now, I'm listening as a woman to this, right? And he didn't know how many women he'd had those with, and he's not responsible for any of them. All the grandchildren that they had. So we listened to his story. Now, I'm sitting there thinking, you know, this is... We're sitting there listening to his story, and basically, he was around Lashinga at the time of the war, and to protect his field, he would sleep in the field, not in his house. And so you need comfort if you're sleeping like so. Yeah, this is what happens. I was just playing. Oh, another reason to get angry. You know, and then we hear more of his story. During that same time of the war, the secret police, they're called PED in Mozambique, because he's actually a Nyanderan, meaning he's from the lakeshore, but he was not at the lakeshore. He was suspicious, and so the PED took him in. And I said to him, so what did they do to you? He said, Mama Elena, they did whatever they wanted. So he was starved, he was hung up, he was beaten. And I'm thinking, here I was judging him for the life he'd led, but he'd been brutalized by that. He became a Christian 10 years ago, and he's now married to the woman that he had been with, and everybody loves him as a leader in the church. His life has been turned around, and he is now, I think he's 69. So imagine that, a whole 60 years of living like that, and then a big change. I love that boat. And my youth, the acolytes, I love his face, but this was doing drama last Easter, and they decided to do the appearances of Jesus after Easter, and Jesus would appear from behind this sheet. So the sheet, and this was Jesus. The view right now, rainy season, looking into the lakeshore, green. But this was the dry season, looking down from our cathedral window. So you see the cattle go by, the baobab trees. Padres Mariamo and Mauricio, these two, and Isabel in here. So these two have also died with HIV. Isabel was the Mothers Union worker for her area for a while, extremely active, maybe you can see that in her smile. But again, she caught it from her husband, who had been away, and she was now separated from. Mariamo never told us either. So he had just finished his training. He'd literally only a month before been ordained as a priest. And Mauricio's still around. And this is a refugee camp church, just outside Nampula, that Mark went to last year, and there were confirmations and people finding life together. They decided to call this, and the next few photos, Trailblazers. We have a doctor there, a British doctor, Peg Cumberland, who's been awarded by the Queen an OBE for her work along the lakeshore there with 20,000 people. And here she is doing some work with epilepsy. Epilepsy is a major problem there. I'm not quite sure why. She has told me once that it's to do with the lack of nutrition and things like that. But she's just started that now. And then Martin and William, part of the Adepto teams. This is the suffragan bishop, Manuel, having his finger pricked for HIV. We've done testing. We've done that too, and it's a bit nerve-wracking. This, you know, what will happen if it comes out positive? Well, there's no reason for it to be positive, and they don't let you think that. But these two guys, this is how they walk around in the rainy season taking medicines, the antiretrovirals, to people who are too far away from the clinic. Yeah, dedication is a good word there. And these are the adapters that work with Rebecca van der Meulen, who is an American. Her parents are in Virginia. So you might possibly meet her one day when she comes to visit. And there's Joanne Beale, who is a water engineer who's there still, but leaves in July. Our office staff. And the senior clergy, the archdeacons. I put that in, isn't that nice? But Mark is known, the women tell me, as Bishop Sangalala, the happy bishop.
We just call him 1092A.
And just the final view from our window, from our veranda, but in the dry season there. That's the photos that I have for you. Have you been writing any questions yet? No?
Oh.
I've moved too fast.
I have a question though.
You have questions? Before the question, maybe you can also think about questions and write them down. Mark thought perhaps he would talk to you a little bit about what's been happening over the last week and some of the things that we talked about. Just while you have time to, yeah? Has everyone got these little pieces of paper?
Not so much, but I remember, John, when we first talked about having this series, to also say what my role would be. When you asked me that, I didn't have any idea. I figured 5 weeks we could figure it out. One of the things that Bishop Mike and I have been talking about is to have a role in promoting mission in our diocese. And I've had a chance to meet with the clergy since then, at a clergy day, which was really enjoyable for me and for us. We both were there. And I've been able to visit with a few and hope to visit a lot more. And the first thing I've noticed is that there is so much good news to talk about in our diocese and in the Episcopal Church. I told the bishops, because I had to give a little quick talk there, I said, there was this Mark Twain quote, I don't know if you remember, that the story about my premature death is greatly exaggerated.
Yeah.
And I was thinking the same thing about the Episcopal Church. The story of our premature death has been greatly exaggerated. There's a lot of good news to talk about. And maybe it's just changing our view a little bit and start celebrating what's going on instead of being fixated with all the problems. And what I wanted to share, this was my first House of Bishops, and the atmosphere was absolutely wonderful. I never did count how many there are, but there are 130 or 40 bishops that meet together. And once again, I have heard stories about all the tensions and debates that are going on, and there have been difficult times. We can't ignore that. But this gathering was so affirming and encouraging that I thought it's good for other people to hear about this too. They meet us in tables of 7 or 8. And those groups around the tables continue to meet for the next 3 years until the next General Convention. So you're always with the same 7 or 8 bishops for 3 years. And the idea is that we get to know each other. And as we talk about difficult issues over these next 3 years, when it comes to the time of having to make hard decisions, you're not making decisions based on people you've never seen before, but people you've shared with and gotten to know. And the presiding bishop has a contagious enthusiasm. He gave a short meditation, because we started our 6 days in prayer and with a meditation. And what a great way to start a meeting of church people, isn't it? Just stop and pray, study the scriptures, and then we can go into our business. And I don't know how much you know about Guiding Bishop Curry, but he loves to talk about Jesus all the time. And in one of the tea breaks, I heard some bishops talking that had been around a long time, and they were saying, we've heard the name Jesus said more often in these 2 days than we have in the last 10 years. And that changes everything when you start to focus on the person of Jesus and the saving work that he's done and the new people that we are, the new creation, looking for the signs of the kingdom. It was just exciting. In the first day, what we had to do was talk together in groups about a topic, and then we met in pairs. And the question was, what is Jesus doing in your life? These are bishops sharing together. What is Jesus doing in your life? And the bishop I shared with it was just tremendous. And then I heard people saying at lunch how touched they were. And that's another thing that I think we can learn, because we as Episcopalians particularly, as I think we said early on, aren't always very good at sharing our faith with each other. We don't always have the language to do it. And the really great thing about this session with me is we don't have to be like anybody else. We can still be ourselves and share the good news of what God is doing in our lives. And that's really exciting, I think. And as I said, still kind of early days, but as Mike and I are talking, is if we can be part of that a movement here in West Virginia, to be more involved in mission, to tell each other about the good things that are happening, to celebrate those together as a diocese, and to kind of change our way of thinking to maintaining what we had to growing into something new. I think this church can grow. Instead of worrying about closing churches, let's start new things. God can do amazing things. That's what we learned in Mozambique. And with so few resources, and we felt completely overwhelmed so many times, and God would just keep surprising us with just amazing things. If you have the courage to just step in and let God take over. And that's the vulnerable part. To be able to let God be God and then respond to that call wherever we are, in our own communities, in our own families. And I really believe that God can do amazing things here as well. So that's what I hope to be involved with. I've got so much learning and listening to do first. And the first step in that is, before I talk to the clergy, is I'd like to visit all the clergy in their homes and where they're a bit distant, to spend the night with them and their family, not on a pastoral visit to the parish, but just to get to know people. Because being a priest isn't always so easy. It can be a lonely calling, and it can be frustrating when things aren't going forward. You live in a bit of a fishbowl. Everyone talks about you, but not always to you. And so one of the things I'd also like to be able to do is support the clergy in their work in parishes, because it's here in the parish where the work happens. That's where things really begin to happen. So, just a brief sort of overview of what I might be involved with as a missionary bishop. Now that I'm official with my own number. But also to publicly, a little later, but say thank you to Bishop Mike, because he had put everything in place so that it went through really smoothly. And many people said, other than the brown envelope that he was handing out to different that he'd organized everything really well. And it was so much easier because there had been some previous problems in the past where it wasn't organized so well and people didn't really know who they were voting for. This time it was very easy, so I'm thankful to him as well. Thank you for your support and prayers, and now we've got time for your questions.
The question I had, you mentioned that if a woman became mentally ill, she could return to her family and the husband no longer had to be married to her. Same thing happened in reverse if the man became mentally ill.
I think so, but I've only ever known women being.
I guess I'm in.
There's another one I know that happened, and the husband didn't want her to go, and he doesn't want her to go. And I had this huge long discussion with him, and he said it was because there's a mixture of different cultures within different tribes. And he says, in my tribe, if you marry someone, it's for life, doesn't matter what. But her tribe says no, it's not. So they were separated.
Is that why she was mentally ill?
No, this one that I'm talking about now, she actually went blind. She had some illness that she didn't get treated quickly enough, and she went blind, so her family took her away, not because she was mentally ill. Yeah. But I've never known a man be taken back to his family. No. Maybe it happens.
Jen. I'll let Helen comment on this too, because she got circled back. About
The best lighter is down by you, Leonard. Right? No, right there on the post, on the other side.
are we over the last few years, and then most recently in the primates meeting, the Episcopal Church has been criticized
Thanks.
for its inclusive stance towards the LGBT community, particularly from the African community. There are two things to say. One is, well, probably a lot of things to say. Two things I can think of saying. And you can read this. One is that, in general, societies in Africa are much more conservative than our own, in general. And this is particularly about sexuality. It is not something that is talked about. And it's very difficult for Africans to talk about sex. Culturally, it's just not acceptable. And this isn't necessarily about homosexuality, just sex at all. It's just not something to do. When we first want to talk about HIV, and of course, the most common way that HIV is transmitted is through sexual relationships. The archdeacons would not let that be talked about in churches. It took almost a year to convince them that we need to talk about this in church. But just because it involves sexual relationships, they didn't want to do it. So that's kind of the context. And the second thing is that the pronouncements made by archbishops do not necessarily represent the whole view across the continent. I've met with a lot of bishops who have a much more nuanced perspective about us in the Episcopal Church and this issue of human sexuality, but they're not allowed to speak it out loud. So an archbishop will give the party line, if you will, the conservative party line, as if it were the only view, and that's not the case. It's much more nuanced than that, but difficult for bishops to speak, and not just about this issue, almost any issue. So it is more complicated than we see. And I think part of the solution to that is what Presiding Bishop Curry is calling the need to work for reconciliation. And all the bishops got a copy of a book about being reconciled reconcilers. And the whole point of that is we need to walk together. We may not agree, but we need to walk together. And to do that, you really need to know the other. If we don't know each other, we can't hear each other. And I think in the current social, political climate that we have in our own country, even more important for us as Christians to really work on that, to be reconciled reconcilers, to hear the other, even if we disagree. Maybe especially when we disagree. To be able to hear the other. We can continue to disagree, but we treat each other with mutual regard and respect. You want to say something about?
Yeah. I think similarly to what Mark was describing about the meetings he's just attended here, if you hear the news from somewhere, oh, you know this in so many other areas of life, when you hear the news from somewhere, it's only some people's opinions that you're hearing. If you were to go to, I believe if you went to see the synod or the provincial synod at work in southern Africa, you would be struck by the fact that there's such a variety of opinions on everything.
That's general convention.
Yeah, on everything. And I do remember once, they brought up the situation as it was at that time, so this is what, 2 or 3 years ago now, on human sexuality. And I remember looking across at 2 of the bishops who I know to be particularly good friends, socially anyway. And they were sitting one in front of the other, and they were disagreeing on this. And I knew, because of the friendship they had between them, both of them were almost in tears, because it hurt. And I've come to see that if you can see people move to the point of tears, then there's not a problem. We're going to work it out. But you're allowed to have your own opinions, aren't you? And as I said, with context, you've got to think of the context too. Just because it's totally not talked about anymore in one part of the world doesn't mean to say it's all over the world. But if you can see the leadership engaged in it, continually engaged to the point of emotion like that, which is not the done thing, then I was really moved by that, and I thought, I know it was frustrating to a lot of people that still our own bishops hadn't come to a consensus over all this after all these years of talking about it. But I felt really good that they were still talking about it to the point of tears amongst friends. Do you get where I'm? So just be aware that it's the same like with every other bit of news you ever hear. It's only coming from certain people. And this also talked about, criminal sanctions. That is only in some countries of a whole continent. In Mozambique, there is not any criminal. Homosexuality is not a crime. It's being changed from that, because they all remember this. Most of Africa was a colony of a European country, so they took on what was given to them from there. And just because it's now changed in those, it takes time to filter through. And South Africa does not have, does it?
No.
So that, I can't speak for all the bishops in Africa. I mean, I just can't. I haven't met them all.
You'd
The
like
ones
to?
no.
She'd like to, but she wouldn't.
No, the ones I know, I have a great deal of respect, and I enjoy, and we were because there were 28 bishops in our province, we did know each other. And I say we because I often used to actually hang out at Synod because of it being outside of our country, and I was on the way to the children or where they were at schools. So I do know them Yeah, anyway. I think this one said, how did Jamie get land? Was it by marriage? I think you do mean Francisco. Yes, it was by marriage. When his mum came back to the lakeshore, she had left this land that she had had with her husband who'd been killed, who died before that in the war. She came back to that land, but because she was now heading it up instead of other family members, it was actually the head of their village who killed her, according to Francisco. The head of the village, not a family member. It was just amazing to me to be having this conversation about land being so important. And this conversation was back in September last year. That it's still there. And that he truly, truly believed that his mother had been killed by some sort of a witchcraft thing. Yeah. Sorry?
That they put up some
Yeah.
kind of medicine.
They put some sort of a medicine in the ground.
It was a
and
curse. that was
Curse,
put-
yeah.
But an invisible one.
Right.
They often talked about landmines. Guy sent a note or a text message into work say, I can't come into work today, I stepped on a landmine. And I was devastated. So I told the secretary, we need to go visit him. And she goes, okay. And so we get in the car and we go and visit this guy. And I'm expecting him to be in a cast or amputated or something. And he's just lying in bed with a slight fever and drinking. And I said, you said you stepped on a landmine. He said, yeah. Well, I said, how's your leg? And he said, it didn't affect my leg. What did it affect? He said, my heart. And I looked at the secretary and she says, it's a spiritual landmine. He stepped on it. It was a curse that his neighbor put on his pavement so that when he walked out of his front door, he was cursed. These things are as real as the table right in front of you. Absolutely, because if you believe that it's there, it is.
It is the downside of believing in a spiritual world, which I wish we did in Western. It would make some of what we teach from the pulpit actually more real, you know. But the downside is, yes, your lives are controlled by these.
There's a lot of fear
Yeah.
in many African cultures because of the spiritual and the influence that people can have, the mediation of the spiritual powers, which is why, you know, in the Bible, Jesus is often expelling demons and spiritual powers, and that speaks so much to the life of we had to talk about expulsion of demons and evil powers all the time, because it was part of life there.
I remember once Mark having malaria, then that whole thing was going to fall apart. I haven't heard anything negative about what's happening in the church. In fact, end of January, Rebecca had a visitor from the States there, and they went to the church, and he came out saying that was awesome, and she said he meant it in the real meaning, awe, full of awe, because of the singing and the participation of people, and that just made me feel really good that it continues. You know? Yeah. But it's not. I mean, I'm not in a very easy place right now. Yeah.
Is there a general perception in Mozambique, in your former diocese, about the West, Britain or the U.S., and about the church specifically? I mean, your presentation has been wonderful about sharing your experiences of this place with us, but I'm curious, what perception do they have of us, if that's ever come up? I mean, what do they know of us, and is it positive or otherwise?
Somebody said to me the other day, you know, if you were to talk about, like, you've been in West Virginia for whatever, 20 years, and you're now going to go back to where you were born, how the West Virginians would feel about that. they'd feel like you were leaving them. You'd taken what you needed and now you're going back. I think that, for us, that's what a lot of people could have felt. And we just said, we're coming to where our children are, and that was a big deal. So when we said we were going, we didn't say, oh, Mark's taking a new job. And I mean, that was obvious he was, you know, but the stress, and that's my position, we came because our children are here. And then I think that helped people get it, you know.
But the view of people of church, I would think they know very little about the Episcopal Church in the United States. Very little. We've not had a historical connection. They know the Church of England much better, because it was a mission of the Church of England that planted the church in Mozambique. And we've had a lot of visitors from the UK over the years. This issue of human sexuality bewilders most people, I think. They just cannot understand why this is such an important topic and how the Episcopal Church made the decisions it has. It's just completely outside their comprehension. And that's partly, as I think I was saying, the lack of knowing each other. I don't know if I related, but one of the big reasons we're here, as opposed to somewhere else, is because Mike and I became friends at Lambda. And we became friends because I, as a bishop of Africa, wanted to understand what was going on in the Episcopal Church. Because all I had was the blogs and the news, and I couldn't understand it. And he wanted to understand what was going on in the African church. And as we met and talked to each other about our respective churches, friendship developed. Because we were honest and open and really wanted the other to understand where we were coming from. And that friendship maintained itself from 2008 till now. And so there's been a lack of that, I think, a lack of connecting, particularly with the Episcopal Church and our part of Africa. I think the Episcopal Church, I met a lot of bishops who had friendships with other dioceses, so I think that is going on. It's just that in Mozambique we didn't, unfortunately.
There are two other questions that were written down here. One was, how are women being protected from HIV? By training. The program that not training, information. Part of the work that our development teams were doing was actually to give information about HIV and a whole load of other things to do with your health, because it affects your nutrition and all sorts of things, and just general attitudes to being a woman in such an environment. And I think that, and then big emphasis which came out of Uganda was that if you know what your status is, you work to keep it that way. Or if you're negative, if you're positive, you now know that you need to use condoms, or, you know. And that's what we were teaching them. Not, I mean, try and talk about abstinence is just not possible. I mean, that's just laughed at.
There's a great story about that, because in one of these demonstrations they had a big stick and they were showing how to put a condom on the stick. And this would protect you and not transmit HIV. And of course, it's your partner would get pregnant. 3 months later, the guy shows up and says, "What you taught us doesn't work." I said, "Why not?" "I put the condom on the stick. My wife's pregnant." Sometimes translations don't always work.
I have to say, as we're talking about women and this sort of thing, that actually by the time you get to menopause age, women are not really that fussed about relationships anymore, because you can't have children. And, you know, the man, honestly, I've heard that so many times. One woman said, "Oh, the men will carry on, but we don't need to." So, there you go. So age actually works for women. Are you on a mission to West Virginia? What is it, if so? Do you know, I'm wondering, because I've spoken to different people about what I could be doing or whatever when I'm here, and fundamentally, I have such a missionary mindset that maybe I should be a missionary in West Virginia, I don't know.
And I hope
But we're not, no.
you'll take to heart what we've been talking about, that God's in a mission to me, to you, each one of us, first and foremost, and that we are all missionaries through your baptism. You're a missionary as well. And when the church starts to really believe that and take it seriously, it could be a very different place.
Today in our clericus, the clergy of the area get together once a month, and various ones were sharing about their call. And so one of our colleagues said something that just really was like common sense in some ways, but it was also a revelation in another way. And but piqued my interest given these presentations and et cetera. And he said that when he knew that he was being called, lo, those many years ago, that he was being called not to necessarily to bring people to Christ, but to bring Christ to people. And that so he saw his ministry as being the sacrament of Christ going to others. And it just one of the things that just really struck just a huge chord with me. In the Bible Belt area, the language of evangelism is bringing people to Christ. And maybe that's why we resist it. But it's, instead of being Christ and bringing Christ to communities, it's bringing people to Christ, which means getting them in the door and their pledge and their work and everything. And anyway, just to offer that, because I think that's a contextual thing for West Virginians, because we're in that kind of Christian way of thinking of that mission is about bringing people to Christ. And it just makes, at least it resonates with me better the way he presented it. And that mission is being Christ and in wherever we are and doing whatever it is, participating in whatever it is God is doing in that place.
And can you see how that understanding will free up everyone in the church, not just the professional?
Yeah. Oh.
To actually, you are a missionary when you go to work wherever you go to work, or when you stay at home and you go to the shops, or or you meet your child. And it just changes the perspective. But that's why you need also to learn and grow, deepen, and then
Yeah.
But if you could have a mindset change, imagine that. That would suddenly mean, I don't know how big is this, guys? 8,000? That would mean you've got 8,000 missionaries here.
Exactly. And it made me think of children and how in their natural state and in their joy, what incredible missionaries children are. They sure are in our place on Sunday morning, and anyway, it's just really, really got me thinking with your questions that you gave us last week, and then when he said that, it was quite profound.
That's the end of the questions. Are there any more? Thank you. I'd just like to say thank you. first asked, because he asked us to do this when we were still in Mozambique. And I wasn't thinking about here. But I think this has been actually really very good for us, because we've talked through things which we can talk about for hours and hours, as you've understood, but also trying to put that here. So it's the, well, so what? And somebody said before we left Mozambique, it'll be interesting to see what God has prepared us for there, for here now, you know. What is it from there that is, and I just would really, if you ever feel like writing down some of the answers to that, I'd really like to hear them, because it helps us, it helps me. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.